Between my grandmother, my father, and my mom, just know somebody did something. Somebody did something to the point where my mother and my father, they hated each other so much, but they stuck by each other's side for years and years and years. I know you guys missed my face, and that's why I'm back. Okay, guys, so I'm back with another video, and I'm not gonna take too much time on the intro because I have an intro now. Yes, guys, so I know this is the long awaited, because I hinted about this on one of my TikTok videos way back, but this is the reason why my father cannot have kids. All right, so again, in order for this story to make sense, I have to take y'all all the way back so I could take y'all here, so it could be like, oh, okay, I understand. So this is it. As long as I knew my mother and my father, they had a, here goes my favorite word, tumultuous relationship, okay? Like, they were legit, like, it was the definition of toxic. Like, if I am toxic today, it is because of my parents. Like, just what I witnessed and what I saw, like, there was no real display of actual love, like of I actually love you, and or this is my significant other. First of all, considering my mother and my father were never married, I think that should also say a lot. So it's important for me to mention that I'm pretty sure that my mother and my father were binded to each other. Now, it is unclear to me if my father may put a binding spell on my mother, and again, when I get into the story, that might reveal my father's motives for doing something like that, or if it was my grandmother who put a binding spell on them because she thought it might have been better for the family dynamic. But so my father, when he met my mother, I believed he worked at a liquor store in Port-au-Prince, and my mother at the time also lived in Port-au-Prince. My mother was always a businesswoman, so she was always business savvy. She was always working on something, and my mother always dreamed big, so she wanted to do like international businesses, and she was ahead of her time because homegirl was basically doing drop shipping. So this was the beginning of my mother's entrepreneurial career, right? And one day she meets my father, and this is this man who works at this liquor store. So they hit it off right away, and I guess at the time within Haitian culture and the 19 whatevers, people just move really quickly. So long story short, they winded up moving really quickly, and they moved in together. And it wasn't that long after that before they had my sister. So once they moved in together, my mother, I told that story on my TikTok before too, about how the neighbor was trying to unalive my sister when she was a baby. So via voodoo and trying to, take her energy, blah, blah. So my mother knew that she couldn't keep renting if she wanted to keep having children, or if she wanted a good chance at raising, this child. So she winded up wanting to move out of the neighbor's house and buying land. So my mother bought land, and she basically had a house built, like literally from the ground up, from nothing, which would be the house that I grew up in Fontamara, Port-au-Prince. So basically, after that whole situation happened with the neighbor, my mother bought the land. They moved into that property instead, built their house, and was living there. And then my mother had me. So in the 3 years, because my sister and I are 3 years apart. In the 3 years that my mother gave birth to my sister, and I was born, my father and my mother's relationship was just not good. Like, it was very, very shaky. My father had winded up leaving his job at the liquor store. So my father was basically a stay-at-home bum, not doing anything. And my mother was the breadwinner, right? And it was hard because, like, she just had a child. So it's like, bro, what are you actually gonna do? My father was always constantly looking for the next thing, trying to figure out what business he wants to do, trying to figure out what it is that he's gonna do, basically, because my mother was so business savvy. So in those 3 years, like, they had their little issues or whatever, like, they had their little problems, but then they kind of, like, stayed together because for the sake of my sister, and also because my father's an opportunist. Like, let's be for real. My mother was providing a home. My mother was providing money. My mother was providing food, like all of this. So, of course, it makes sense for him to stay. So, fast forward 3 years, they winded up having me, and I was born. And even though I looked exactly like my father, like I'm talking spitting image of my dad still went around telling his entire family that I wasn't his and that my mother was and yeah, like my father like literally asked the entire family to stay away from my mother and to not go meet my mother. It wasn't until my father's sister, who's my aunt, I love her so much now. My aunt basically one day took it upon herself to go behind my father's back and go visit my mother. And she said the second she saw me, she knew that I was my father's daughter. So she knew that he was tripping. And in Haiti, of course, they don't have like, DNA tests or anything like that. But by the time my grandmother came around to visit me, my grandmother also already knew like, I was my father's daughter and my father was tripping. So my mother and my father, as long as I knew them, they stayed together. But also as long as I knew them, they hated each other. So I remember like, which is why I'm the way that I am now. I do not play when it comes to domestic violence because I grew up witnessing domestic violence. I literally grew up watching my mother and my father fighting. Oh, trigger warning. I literally grew up watching my mother and my father like fist fighting. And they weren't like fighting like, like pushing and little hits. No, like they were full on like going at it. Now, here's the thing. My mother never allowed herself to be a victim because my mother always fought back. However, like as a child, sitting there and watching your father beat on your mother and watching your mother get her lick back, it does so much to you psychologically that it's crazy. The dynamic between my father and my mother was so screwed up because in the midst of all of this, my mother's working, and at this point, let's fast forward to 5 years after I was born. So now at this point, I'm very well used to the chaos, and I used to spend a lot of time at that point with my grandmother at my grandmother's house. And the reason why I used to spend a lot of time at my grandmother's house is because one, the relationship between my mom and my dad was so toxic, it was so explosive that sometimes they literally could not stand to stay in the same house. So they used to like travel, but also because my mother genuinely was doing business and my mother used to travel a lot. So at the down periods where we didn't have nannies to come to, physically watch us in the home and take care of us, stay home nannies, they used to just bring us to our grandparents and our grandparents to just take care of us for like weeks and even months at a time. So at the time I was staying with my grandmother down deeper in Port-au-Prince a whole lot more. So that would have been around the time that I was 5. And around this time, my father would come visit, my father would come pick me up. And every once in a while when my mom is like back in town or both of them are back in town, like they would come pick us up from our grandmother's houses and our grandmother's house and, go back to the crib and we'd be home for that month or for that weekend or whatever. So for one of the weekends, my father comes and picks me up, but this time he's not taking me home. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, where are we going? He's like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to take you somewhere and this is going to be our little secret. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like at the time, yeah, like I said, I must have been like 5 or 6 years old. My father takes me not too far from where my grandmother lived, like literally like, let's just say like 2 blocks down from where my grandmother lived. And we went to this woman's house and I still remember this woman. She was light skinned. She had a son and my father loved her son. Okay. Like I remember I'm sitting around and I'm playing with her son because the son was around my age, but he was definitely a little bit older than me. I used to stand around, play with the son while my dad and this woman goes into the house and do whatever it is that they would do. And then, he would come out. And my dad made it so like, oh, this is daddy's friend. Like, don't you love her? Like, my dad made it a point that I like this woman. And as a kid, I'm naive, so I really don't know what's going on. But still, I just knew that it's odd because why do you have another woman friend? Like, where my mother at? Like, I knew it was weird, but at the same time, I'm still a kid. So, like, what am I gonna do? That was the first time I met this woman, and I met her son. I remember another time my dad came and picked me up from school, and again, my school was very close to where my grandmother lived, which is why it was convenient for me to stay at my grandmother's house. My dad came, picked me up from school, and drove straight to that lady's house. Now, I remember the drive to that lady's house. My father, because I used to be a kid, I was always very charismatic. Everybody always loved me as a kid. I was a big personality, okay? So my father used to literally tell me what to say when I was in the car. Like, he'd be like, okay, well, before we get there, let me tell you a couple of things. Like, he'd be like, when we get there, I want you to say, I love daddy so much. And I also want you to like run up to me and like give me a hug. And if you can also say that the lady is pretty. Like, my father would literally just be coaching me in the car as to like what to say when I get there. Now, of course it feels awkward, but as a kid, I would basically just listen. And my father never really told me to keep this a secret, and never really told me not to tell my mother. But the way my father presented it, he presented it like it was so innocent that there was nothing to tell my mom, like, genuinely. And come to think of it, I don't actually remember ever actually going to my mom and telling my mom, like, hey, I think, like, my dad, whatever. This woman was around from the time that I was 5 years old up until well into up until we left Haiti. This woman was still in the picture. And keep in mind, my father used to fight my mother, like, and I'm talking fight my mother because one of their common fights, or one of the fights that I remember them getting into, was my father going through my mother's phone and finding that she's been talking to other men, and finding that she has other men friends. My father used to be so jealous that he doesn't even care if it's a friend. He doesn't even care what type of relationship. If my mother has the audacity to talk to another man, like, my dad would like literally lose his mind. So I remember one of the fights that they had was he went through my mom's phone and he found something, and my mom like was in the kitchen. He ran out to the kitchen and he got all up in her face, and then like, you know, he punched her, and like they started fighting, blah blah blah, all over something that he found. And I remember at the time being a kid being like, Mom, like, that, like, are you stupid? Like, why would you let him catch you? Like, I think this is also why I'm so smart for my age and I'm so advanced, because I must have been like 6, no longer than 7, bro. And I'm learning at that point, like, to always delete information that you do not want to be found. So I remember after that day that they got into that argument, and because I hated when my mom and my dad used to fight so much, that I used to physically go through my mother's phone every day that she came back from work and delete every last phone call that she had. I used to literally wipe my mother's phone. Like, I wouldn't read her text messages or anything. I would literally just wipe her phone, because I just wanted to avoid any and every fight, any and everything. Like, first of all, that's traumatizing. If you are a mother and your kids are in a... Someone's knocking on my door. Sorry, guys. As I was saying, yeah, if you have like a kid and you are stuck in a situation where you're getting your ass beat every day by your man, like, I hope you know that it's seriously gonna have some it's gonna with your kid. Like, it's gonna have... your kid is gonna grow up to have some real, like, it's gonna have some deep psychological effects on your child. Like, I remember, like, I don't want anybody to put their hands on me. Like, anyway, this is not what the story time is about. It's not about my personal trauma. So let's just keep going. Yeah, my father would tell me what to say, and I would go visit the side chick, da. And I remember one of the visits that my father took me to, he was expressing to this woman how he always wanted to have a boy. And my father made it very, very, very clear that he was disappointed at the fact that my mother provided 2 girls for him, because my father always wanted a boy, and he loves soccer, football. he loves that shit. So, you know, it's like he wanted a boy that he can play some football with. Like, he wanted a boy, like, he just wanted a little version of him. And so my dad, like, literally just walked around his whole life. Like, if your mother cannot give me a boy, I'm finna get a boy. Like, any way, shape, or form, like, I'm gonna get a boy. And meanwhile, my mother is working hella hard, trying to get my father a job, trying to get my father employed. And basically my mother winded up hooking my father up at a job with the Haitian government. He was driving some kind of car. I don't know if I could say what my father was, but I'm not gonna say it. But just know that my father is a really militant man, and he doesn't mind pew-pewing you, like, and not think about it again. So basically my father starts working at the Haitian government, and at this point, like I don't remember my father coming home a whole lot, like, but at that point he definitely stopped taking me to his, you know, side chicks houses, blah blah blah. And I remember the next time I saw the side chick was honestly like maybe a couple months before the earthquake in Haiti hit and I left Haiti. But from what I remembered, like, he was trying, like, obviously she was a side chick. So now that I'm older, I came to understand that this woman was constantly actually waiting for my father to leave my mother. My mother knew about the side chick. But, you know, obviously my father was not leaving my mother and my mother was not leaving my father. So the side chick was just side chicking. And yeah, and I guess, you know, we the kids was just basically stuck. Yo, that's a big ass fly. That shit is so fat. I knew that my father was trying to have a kid with the side chick, and my mom definitely very well knew about the side chick, and the side chick became like a fighting topic. So when my mom would be more the aggressor was when my mom would, like, you know, see text messages or see my father with the side chick, like things like that. Like, all of those little things would just bring up fights. Now, why would I think that my mother and my father were binded together? And the reason why I feel that my grandmother must have had something to do with it was because my grandmother was like the voodoo priestess of the family, right? Before she gave everything all up, like, she used to be the one in the family. Not only did she used to sell love spells, she used to do spells for people. Like, my grandmother did an array of work when it came to voodoo, right? And so knowing that her son, my father, wasn't really doing much, and he saw the difference between my father when he was working at the liquor store and my mother came around, and where they are at now, who would want to give that up? My father is stupid. My father's ego, his pride will always get in the way. So I don't doubt that my father would have actually had a kid with my mother and dipped, because that is in my father's personality, 100%. However, why did my father stay stuck? Because here's the thing, my father ditched me and I'm his daughter. I'm my father's daughter, and my father has no problem leaving me in the mud. My father is a psychopath. So why did he stick to my mother so much? This man would be gone for like 2 years at a time and still know where home was. Like, so that gives me the reason to believe. And also the way that they hated each other. Like, when I tell you guys, like, I have no concept of real love or what love actually looks like, because I didn't grow up around it. Like, my mother and my father, as long as I knew, and I can't even rack my brain to try to come up with a moment that they actually loved each other. I can't, because those moments didn't exist. And so, but they were always together. And it wasn't even like a together out of convenience, because like I said, my mother was carrying this whole operation on her back. So I have reasons to believe that my grandmother actually did something, because, like, when my mother came into the picture, everybody's life upgraded. And because my father was the man of, my father at that point became the man of the family. Because at this point, my mother got my father hooked up with a passport. My mother got my father hooked up with a visa. So now my mother got my father hooked up with a job that's paying him real money. So now my father is now able to provide to the rest of his family. And my father has a lot of women, like sisters and stuff. So he was looked at as the man, you know what I mean? But everybody knew, like, it was my mother. Like, everybody came to find out, like, my mother was really that bitch. But on the outside in Haiti, he's a man. So, you know, it's the man. Like, you picked a wonderful woman, but you picked her, you know what I mean? So it's like all credit goes to him. So it would make sense that my grandmother would have done everything in her best interest and in her son's best interest to keep my father binded to my mother. Now, it could have also been my mom. I don't know, because my mom loved my father. I don't understand why, or her version of love, but I think that my mother was just scared, and she, like, having no companion in your life is fucking tough. Like, being lonely, and if my mother felt anything like how I be feeling these days, I understand why he would keep somebody like my father around. Because the feeling of loneliness will eat you up alive. And the childhood that my mother had was not easy to say the least. My mother, much like me, didn't grow up with a mom. My mother's mother passed away when my mom was 16. My mom had to step up and take care of all her other siblings. So my mother had to become successful. My mother literally had to get her family out of the mountains, out of the hood. So, you know, my mother did what she could. But, you know, in the midst of all of that, doing what you can, succeeding, it doesn't mean that you don't feel that void. You don't feel that empty. You don't feel that sadness, you know? So if my father was all my mother knew, like, I understood why she would stay. But I also just, something is not adding up, because she hated the man too. I remember one time my mother managed to get my father a factory job in Florida. So my father went to Florida for a whole fucking year. And that was the best year of my life, because my father was one of the traumatizing figures in my life, because I was petrified of my dad. Like, I used to be so afraid of him. Like, I saw him as a literal, like, a bully. So it was like a year and a half. Like, it was a long time, and he was gone. And I remember, like, it was so peaceful in the house, and I never wanted him to come back. My mom wasn't getting beat on. My mom wasn't angry. My mom was calm. Like, the house was calm. Our nannies wasn't freaking out. Our nannies wasn't scared. Like, it was beautiful. And then suddenly the mother came back, and, like, all hell just broke loose. Like, it's like every time he would be gone for a long period of time, it would only be a matter of time until he came back, raining terror and raining hell, and my mother never stopped him anytime. So, like I said, my mother knew about the side chick. My mother knew that they had a relationship, and my mother just was not in control of it. And so, again, don't know if my mother was the one who put a spell on my father because she loved him so, or if it was my father to trap my mother, because, you know, obviously my mother was a major asset. But between my grandmother, my father, and my mom, just know somebody did something. Somebody did something to the point where my mother and my father, they hated each other so much, but they stuck by each other's side for years and years and years. Like, and I remember literally one day I woke up to glass smashing on the floor. I must have been 7 years old. My sister's birthday was coming up, and I woke up to glass being broken because my mom threw glass at my dad, and they start physically fighting, and they're breaking everything in the house. And it was 4 a.m, you guys, and they both packed their shit and ran away and left me and my sister in the house for like 2 days. Anyway, yes, don't take your kids out of domestic violence scenarios, please. It's really not healthy. But yeah, so for that year and a half that my father was gone after that, it was freaking amazing. Like, my mother never ran away. Like, it was always amazing. Anyway, back to the whore. My mother knew about her, and my mother knew that my dad was screwing her, and my mother knew that basically, like, if this side chick provided a boy, then my mother would have never, like, if this side chick provided a boy, it would have shook up the entire dynamic, because my father was daring enough, because my mother already knew about her. he would have tried to merge families. Yes, because my father would have never left my mother alone. Absolutely not. That was the asset. And my mother already understood that if you had a kid with this lady and a boy that you've always wanted, my mother would be stuck taking care of another woman's kid for a very long time. Because again, my mother was the asset. This woman didn't have nearly as much as my mother had. So the one son that she had, my father used to treat that little boy like he was his own, like dead ass. My father would ask my mother for money to provide for the side chick's son. My father moved here and kept in contact with the side chick's son. Like, so my mother knew if the side chick had my father's baby in her stomach, my mother would be stuck with a side chick family for the rest of her life. So what did my mother do? Now, again, I got this story from my aunt. So my mother decided that, hey, I'm just going to trap him. I'm going like trap him. Like, you have 2 kids with me and I'm deciding that that's enough. Like, I'm deciding that you don't need to have no more kids. My mother already knew that she could not stop my father from cheating. My father also already knew that he could not stop my mother from cheating. Again, it wasn't even like a relationship of convenience because both people were not providing. Only one was, and providing very fucking well at that. Providing for both her family and my father's family. So like, why won't you just leave her? It was never about us because my father never had a loving relationship where he loved his kids so. So it was just like, why stay? Why did you stay? You loved your side chick. You loved the kid that your side chick had. It's not even your kid. Why did you stay? Like, it just doesn't make sense. And they were never married. They were never married. I grew up going to school, seeing other children having married parents, and I'm like, I don't relate. I don't have married parents. Like, they threaten to leave us alone in the house all the time and run away from each other. Like, what the is this? Like, anyways, guys. Again, my mother knew that he could not stop my dad. She could not stop my dad from cheating, and also knew that she could not leave my dad. My dad also knew that he could not stop my mother from cheating, and that he also could not leave my mother. And so they just did what they both did on the side. Because don't get me wrong, my mother was definitely cheating. So, so they kept whatever it was that they kept on the side. And basically, like, I kind of became the person to just wipe my mother's phone, which is how I knew my mother was cheating, because at some point I did start reading those messages and I was like, oh, Mom, what are you doing? Like, this is wild. But, you know, my dad, I guess my mom always knew where home was too. So, you know, whatever. And she never bought like any other man around us or anything. Like, whatever she had going on, she kept outside. Like, I knew she had a little man in Panama. Like, anyway, so definitely at that point, my mother decided that 2 kids was enough for my father. I will not be stuck taking care of the next woman's kid. And so with that being said, my mother definitely went to a voodoo priest and, you know, ordered a local potion and put it in his food, because my mother was a great chef. Like, she used to cook like a lot and keeping that man fed. And one of those days that she was cooking for him, you know, she slipped a little something in his food that, you know, would tie his tubes. Yeah, so she gave him like a vasectomy, a mastectomy, getting his balls tied, or is your tubes tied for women? Whatever it is, a dickectomy. I don't know what it's called, but I just know that my father, he's shooting blanks. Blanks. Because my father had that much audacity to let my mother know, like, yes, I'm trying. Like, I'm trying to have a boy with this next. And if you know, like, as soon as I get this motherfucker, I'm out of here. Like, if you thought I was going to stay with you You thought I was gonna take this disrespect? I don't need this. I got my little government job. I could bounce. My mother said, word? All you waiting for is a boy? I hope you get a boy. I hope you get a boy. And let's just say my father never got a boy. He ain't never got a boy. And when I tell you guys, when I got older, I discovered the whorishness of my father. Like, no one is a bigger than my dad. Like, no, it's seriously wild. Like, I don't understand why he pulls so many women. He's short. Anyway, oh, is that why I don't like short men? Like, I don't like short men. But, like, my dad is so short and he pulls so many bitches. And it's so confusing to me because, like, what do you guys see in him? And my father always presented himself as a money man, a businessman. The creepy thing is my father basically, like, adapted my mother's entire personality and everything that my mother used to do. Like, my mother was like a luxury girl, you know? Like, my mother was introduced to, like, the finer things in life. So my mother started introducing my father to the finer things in life. So when my father went back to the hood, my father was now trying to gatekeep, but low-key introduce everybody else who hasn't seen none of the stuff that he'd seen at that point to, like, a better living. And so everybody was convinced that my father was like this god, this man of man, like, you know what I mean? But, like, it was just my mother. And so when my father used to come back, everybody used to call him diaspora, like, you just came back from America, like, you got money. And so, like, you know, it doesn't surprise me that he was actually pulling women. And he also presented himself as, like, the money man. Like, he used to go out there and, like, give money to these, like, a lot. Take money from my mother to go support other side girls and stuff. Anyway, my dad was even a nanny. Like, he was wildin', okay? Like, my daddy was wildin'. And so, I don't even know if my mother tied his tubes because of just the side chick or because of, like, the amount of women. Like, he was just a whore. Like, even after my mother passed away and I was living with him, there was LaQuisha, Loanda, Miranda, Lisa, Tisha, LaQuisha. Like, it was women after women after women after women. Like, my father never got tired. Like, it was disgusting. Anyway, so how do I, like, my father hinted that my mother did something to him a couple of times. And it's crazy because right before my mother passed away from cancer, she was actually with child. However, she had to get surgery, so she, unfortunately, the baby had to. But while my mother was sick, she was pregnant. And she wasn't pregnant by my daddy child. But anyway, my father, after my mother passed away, he used to, like, have so much anger towards my sister. Also because my sister looks a lot like my mother. He used to have a lot of anger towards her and even towards me as well. Like, and he used to talk about how much he regrets not having boys, how much, like, it just sucks that we're both girls, how he doesn't want us, he wanted boys, and that it just fucking sucks for him. And, like, he just regrets, like, now he really cannot have a boy. Like, he just cannot have a boy, and it just sickens him. It absolutely, like, it's disgusting. Like, he talks about, like, I swear if I, like, while he was raising us, he used to tell my sister and I, like, I swear if I could have another kid, like, I would ditch y'all, I would leave y'all here and go raise my other boy. Like, I just want a boy. Like, I don't want you guys. Like, my dad never made it abundantly clear that he wanted a boy. Like, and that us two girls was just ruining his life. And that if he ever had the opportunity to get a boy, he would leave us in the dust. And it just seems like no matter how many he wasn't getting that boy. No boy for you. No boy for you. And I remember one day he blacked it. He said, if your mother wasn't so fucking evil, I wouldn't be stuck with you guys. Or at least I would have had a boy. At least I would have had the opportunity to start over. I just want to start over. I just want to start over parenting. Because you guys, I just messed up with you guys. I didn't mess up. You guys messed up. And so I just want a boy to start over so I could know that I wasn't the problem. Because I'd have a man walking around just like me. And I would have known that I've done my job as a father. Yeah. So, yeah, so till this day, you know, he cannot have kids, and it doesn't matter how many different types of women that he has around. They're all just extorting money out of him, really. And yeah, he's shooting blanks. No matter how many girlfriends he has, no matter how much of their sex he performs, he just, unfortunately, he is stuck with two girls. So yeah, that's the story. After my mother passed away, my father did have it hard. Like, I'm not gonna lie, but I don't know if he had it hard because, you know, obviously we were all new to the country. We didn't speak English. Like, we were all literal fishes that were like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, they plucked us out of an environment and threw us into a new, different environment where everything was different. And then on top of that, like, his punching bag was gone. So, like, my dad was really going through it for a long time after my mother passed away, actually, which confused me because I was like, did you love mom? Because why are you struggling? Or are you just crying because now you have to work? Like, oh, princess, you now became the breadwinner. Like, the freaking roles have reversed. Like, oh my god. Like, oh gosh. But yeah, guys, that's the story on why my father couldn't have kids. It's not super creepy once again, but like, I'm sure it makes more sense, right? Like, and you guys let me know if you thought it was my grandmother, my father, or my mother that put a binding spell. Let me know if you guys think a binding spell, a love spell, or anything was involved, because I definitely think that there was. And yeah, that's basically it for the story. If you made it this far into the story time, then I know you fuck with me, and I fuck with you too. I love you guys. I love my abducted humans. If you're seeing this video, this is your first time, subscribe to my channel. I have so many more spooky stories. I have some that are my own, and I have a lot of submitted stories as well. If you're on TikTok, go and give me a follow on TikTok. My name on TikTok is the same. It's Rebecca Journey without the S. And I have so many of these types of spooky stories available for you guys. I love you guys so much. Without further ado, I'm gonna go because I have work and I'm gonna have to edit this video to drop to you guys. I hope you guys enjoy it. Yeah, bye. I will be back with another hour story time. I know this one wasn't an hour, but I'll definitely be back with the hour story. But yeah, I hope this was fascinating, or that you learned something, or that you related to me. I don't know. All right, bye. Peace out.